Story 1. Man-made fire spurred the rapid development of human brains. Story 2. Without the printing press, we could not share ideas or record manuals and histories. Story 3. The process that extracts nitrogen from the air has allowed human populations to reach heights that were previously unattainable. Story 4. The single most influential invention is the written word. It did not just chronicle our days. It sculpted culture, created societies, and forged histories. In a world tangled in myths and whispers, it was the ink that etched reality into permanence. Every book, letter, and scribbled note extended the reach of thought across time and space, binding us in an infinite dialogue. When you open a book, you do not just read. You connect with every mind that dared to dream before you. It is pretty powerful for something that started as a simple scratch on a clay tablet. Story 5. The wheel not only allowed easier movement, but without it there would be no cogs, gears, and so on. Story 6. Jack Kilby, the inventor of the integrated circuit. Sure, he stood on the shoulders of language and writing, of the wheel and of water sanitation, but the entire world and the lives of billions have been transformed by that tiny innovation. Story 7. The internet has changed everything about how we communicate and do business, but not always for the better. Story 8. I would like to add clear glass, in addition to the common items mentioned in the comments. The scientific method relies on observing, analyzing, formulating theories, and testing them. Without clear glass, there would be no telescopes, microscopes, or computer monitors. Glass has played a central role in modern scientific advancement. For more detail, see the Veritasium video on glass. Story 9. The printing press is often considered high on the list. It was one of the first times in human history that the availability of information dramatically increased. Next came radio, television, and finally the internet. But the printing press did it first. Story 10. Hand washing prevents the spread of disease. Not long ago, doctors would come directly from autopsies to deliver babies without washing their hands. Story 11. Religion influences billions of people and shapes behavior in both positive and destructive ways. It has been at the center of many wars and episodes of mass violence. Religious missions and missionaries have played a major role in the spread of faiths. Christianity, for example, might not have become a major global religion without missions that began around the 1500s and encouraged large numbers of converts. I do not believe any religion would have grown solely through organic means. Many relied on mass influence and, in some cases, forced conversion to take the form they have today. Story 12. Glass. Without it, there would be no microscopes, test tubes, petri dishes, Erlenmeyer flasks, or spectacles. Many of these items have been replaced with disposable plastics, but originally they were made of glass. Plastics themselves would not have been developed without glass. Story 13. Glass. They should call this the glass age. Is that important? Story 14. Glass, first used as an architectural element for windows, has since found applications in various advanced technologies, including advanced semiconductor materials lithography machines, medical devices, satellites, and smartphone screens. Story 15. The right answer is the clock. It is hard to find a modern technology or field of science that cannot be traced back to the clock. Story 16. Law and moral compass are about making rules that dictate what you may or may not do. Story 17. What has had the most influence? The printing press, computers, and smartphones are important, but the primary answer is glass. None of those technologies would be possible without glass. The printing press helped normalize eyeglass use, which led to advances in glassmaking and to inventions such as microscopes and optical lenses. Story 18. The printing press. Before the printing press, books and other types of written information had to be hand-copied, which was an expensive and time-consuming process. This severely limited the spread of information. After the invention of the printing press, there was an explosion in scientific and engineering progress because people could learn from what others had discovered and build on it. Story 19. Consider the car. Look at how much land is dedicated to vehicles. Highways, roads, parking lots, and driveways. Suburban sprawl forces people to drive everywhere instead of walk. People once used walking as primary transportation. How much time do we waste driving? Cars are a major cause of rising obesity. Cities used to be built for walkability. Automotive expansion has caused vast environmental destruction, with habitats lost or fragmented and species going extinct. Car accidents and roadkill add to the harm. Large portions of the planet's finite land have been consumed by car infrastructure. The automobile is the invention that has most influenced our lifestyles, health, habits, land use, and the natural world. Story 20. The Gutenberg press has had a greater impact than anything else, and most other contenders would not have been possible without it. Story 21. Nitrogen fertilizer allowed us to grow enough food to add billions to the global population. Story 22. Electricity is the invisible backbone of everything we do. Without it, none of the modern inventions we rely on would be possible. Story 23. I have not scrolled through all the entries, but I will offer the word boat. The refinement from paddling to sailing to powered boats meant large bodies of water were no longer a barrier. Story 24. The controlled use of fire certainly enabled many of the other developments discussed here. Story 25. Probably either sewer and water systems or the printing press. Story 26. Many positives have been listed, but a few negatives must rank among the most impactful. Plastic, chlorofluorocarbons, and gasoline, including leaded gasoline. Story 27. Teaching. It does not matter what you discover if the next generation never learns it. Language is another extremely important element, followed by tools. Finally, the idea of translating the universe into a language we can understand is science. Story 28. How the printing press turned publishing into a global phenomenon. Johannes Gutenberg's Instagram would be insane. Story 29. Agriculture. We would all still be hunting and gathering in furs if no one had invented it. Other important inventions include plumbing, the wheel, levers, electric generators, transistors, and vaccines. Story 30. Sliced bread, because without it we would not have anything to compare later inventions against. Story 31. Efficient steam engines were fundamental to the Industrial Revolution. They were a compact power source that could be used to drive mills and factories, pump out mines, and eventually form the basis of electrical power stations. Story 32. I am sure this has already been mentioned, but birth control for women. Story 33. Language beyond basic survival skills like fire or hunting. Everything else is impossible without it. Story 34. The internet revolutionized the way people communicate, access information, conduct business, and interact with one another. It has connected the globe, broken down geographical and cultural barriers, fostered innovation, and enabled the rapid spread of ideas. The internet has reshaped nearly every aspect of modern life, from education and healthcare to commerce and entertainment, making it one of the most influential inventions in history. Story 35. The kazoo has changed music and made it far more accessible to the average person. Story 36. The lens lets us bend light to see things far and wide, from particles to distant black holes. It has expanded our view of reality and stretched our minds to realize that facts are stranger than fiction. Story 37. The printing press took literacy from being a niche skill of the upper classes and made it more accessible. Story 38. The first knife. That's when humanity began to dominate. Story 39. Without the magnetic compass, international maritime trade would not have blossomed, European colonization of far-flung nations would not have happened, and we probably would not have mapped the continents and the globe. Story 40. Chemical fertilizer is essential. Without it, we would not be able to feed 8 billion people. Story 41. Writing. Without it, knowledge could only be passed by word of mouth. Story 42. As far as inventions go, I agree that harnessing electricity, the printing press, and agriculture are important. I would choose tools and their development over time. If we had never learned to make basic tools, would we be where we are today? Story 43. Before refrigeration, we had to focus primarily on producing food to meet immediate needs. Story 44. I will say it once more. The printing press. Without it, most people would still be illiterate, and many genius inventors would never have had the opportunity to acquire the knowledge necessary to develop their ideas. Story 45. Underground plumbing. Not much else is going to happen with sewage everywhere. Story 46. I visited a museum yesterday that displayed ships from different periods. It was surprising that from the 1400s to the late 1800s, designs and weaponry remained largely unchanged. Then, in the 1900s, everything changed. Sails disappeared, ships were made of steel, and submarines and missiles appeared. We have seen more development in the last 100 years than in the previous 500 to 1,000 combined. I would say there were two major step changes: the development of agriculture and the formation of civilization, and the Industrial Revolution with the advent of steam power and electricity. Story 47. Nuclear weapons, in my opinion, changed global affairs decisively. They caused horrific damage, but their existence stabilized relationships among the world's superpowers and allowed for global prosperity that would not have been achieved if every country had continued to divert resources toward war efforts. Story 48. Smart salt shaker. Can you imagine life before we had a salt shaker that connects to the internet and requires you to install and use an application to get salt? This brilliant invention alone brought us from a Type 1 civilization to the maximum level. Story 49. Modern world. The printing press. It accelerated the spread of thoughts and ideas. The Protestant Reformation would not have been possible without it. The number of wars and conflicts that originated from religious leadership, including in the New World, is astounding. One could argue that language and writing are even bigger developments in human evolution. The internet will have the same impact as the printing press, but on a much shorter timescale. It accelerates the dissemination of information in ways similar to the printing press. Modern banking also deserves an honorable mention. If looking for a more human evolution and anthropological answer, it would be agriculture. Civilization, as we know it, could not have existed without it. Story 50. The fine people who share content on Reddit, please give yourselves a round of applause. Story 51. This is a tie between the ammonia synthesis process developed by Haber-Bosch and the transistor. I see agriculture is also important, but despite its impact, if you observe what these two inventions accomplished and the time frame in which they did it, there is no contest. Story 52. The internet changed how we live, work, and connect forever. That's insane. Story 53. Unfortunately, it's going to be artificial intelligence. We should be wary of the machine. Once people start talking to the computer instead of each other, we're screwed. Story 54. Fertilizer is the correct answer to this question and always will be. Story 55. When we first tilled the soil with the plow, it sowed the seeds of civilization. The combination of stick and stone to make simple tools was another influential invention. Story 56. The transistor and the central processing unit are among the most complex objects mankind has created. Story 57. Container technology. Without the idea of using something to hold or contain things, we would have nothing. Story 58. Domestication. If we did not domesticate ourselves, who knows where we would be? Story 59. I would say penicillin is up there. It has probably saved hundreds of millions of people since its discovery. Some of them went on to influence the world in other ways. It thus had a multiplicative impact. Story 60. Donnie Darko said it best. That's easy. Antiseptics. Like the whole sanitation thing. Joseph Lister, 1895. Before antiseptics, there was no sanitation, especially in medicine. Story 61. The threaded rod and its nuts and bolts hold the world together and are miraculous levers that distribute a lot of force with each small turn. Story 62. Indoor plumbing. People have thought a lot about that. Story 63. Influence. Aside from the very obvious ones such as language, farming, and the internet, I would say watercraft. Purely in terms of influence, being able to get from one place to another has had rather astounding effects on the world. Story 64. The aqueduct was the beginning of water management. It led to underground plumbing, sanitation, and reliable fresh water for people who did not live near a water source. Because everyone needs fresh water to survive, aqueducts enabled large population growth. Story 65. It is the steam engine, by the way. Everything in the modern world depends on coal-powered steam engines developed during the Industrial Revolution. Without them, none of the other technologies could exist. Story 66. I would argue the scientific method is the most important. Since the beginning of the Enlightenment, many metrics have become hockey stick graphs because we learned how to conduct systematic inquiry after informal experimentation. Story 67. The wheel and fire for the ancients, electricity for the modern world, and the internet for our generation. All these things have turned the world into a different and better place. Story 68. Shoes. All the new items are impossible without protected feet. Other candidates are bucket, wheel, water containers, Shiloh, fences, and floors. Story 69. Pizza and beer as a lunch combo, and it's not even close. Story 70. Haber-Bosch printing and the transistor have completely changed the world. Story 71. Imagine how different everything would be without the lie. Story 72. Without the Haber process, many of us would likely be food insecure or perhaps not even be here. Story 73. It must be either the discovery of fire or the invention of the wheel. Story 74. Beer is a way to store the nutrition of grain that does not go bad nearly as quickly as other forms. It allowed humans to adopt farming and stay in one place for extended periods rather than following herds. Story 75. The agricultural revolution is considered the birth of civilization. Equally important was the forge. Nothing we have today would exist without electricity, which at scale depended on the steam engine, which depended on innovations in steelmaking, which depended on centuries of learning how to work metal and on forges. Metal tools greatly improved the durability and capability of implements used in farming, hunting, and construction, for example chisels for millstones. Metal-enabled equipment such as carts, looms, and chains for machinery, and construction materials like screws, nails, brackets, beams, and bars. In the modern context, refined metals are used in petroleum extraction, in all vehicles, in construction, and in machines that produce virtually everything we see and touch. Story 76. The control of fire and cooking made us human. Story 77. Wireless fidelity is responsible for every just 5 more minutes moment and every forgotten responsibility. Keeps us connected and distracted. Story 78. Many people here don't seem to understand what an invention is. Story 79. The world was a much better place without the internet. Story 80. The internet might prove to be the demise of the world. Story 81. The use of fire, at least, was the first major development that set us apart from other species. Story 82. The top inventions and discoveries will always center around energy, information, or population capacity. In my opinion, agriculture, which increases population capacity, is the most important. Language, the alphabet, the printing press, and the internet are major advances in information. Harnessing steam during the Industrial Revolution is another major energy-related development. Story 83. The Haber process allows us to grow enough food to support our current population. Without it, the global population would be constrained to a much lower level. No judgment on whether this is a net positive, but this is my 2 pence. Story 84. Publicly traded corporations. The way they were able to defer responsibility and accountability paved the way for the worst atrocities in history, and it continues to this day. America absolutely refuses to implement obvious evidence-based solutions to many of its problems because doing so would threaten corporate profits. They are fast-tracking the destruction of our entire biome because the bottom line must increase. Story 85. The mechanical lathe is the foundation of modern civilization. Take my word for it. Story 86. Printing press. It is the objective already analyzed and established as the answer. Story 87. The light bulb made the night much less significant. It gave people more time to invent new things. Story 88. Fertilizer. We were projecting a 50% contraction in world population until a man I shall not name, known for other inventions, developed the process of extracting nitrogen from the air. Story 89. Control of fire, the humble spoon, the invention of wheels and cogs, and penicillin. Story 90. The Haber-Bosch process increased the global population from 2 billion to 8 billion. Story 91. Electromagnetism. There would be no electricity or electric motors without it. Story 92. The printing press made it possible for many ideas to survive and, in some cases, to be created. That is the power of influence. Some argue that writing fits this role, but writing can be slow and many written works have been lost over history. Since the 15th century, however, it has become difficult to erase knowledge completely. Traces usually remain. Agriculture could also be considered, but I view it more as a way of life than as a single invention. Story 93. Pornography. No, I'm not joking. Easy access to material redirects energy from the relentless pursuit of reproduction and instant gratification to more worthwhile efforts. Story 94. The vacuum flask, also called a thermos bottle, keeps beverages hot or cold. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.